Hello, everybody. My name is Dr. Davina Lloyd, and I'm the chair of the steering committee of the CEDAW People's Tribunal. And with me today is Margaret Owen, who has been working in women's rights for longer than most people that I know, and has more knowledge about CEDAW than most people that I know. It's a great pleasure to have her here today. Welcome, Margaret. I just wondered if you could just give people a brief flavour. I know there's a lot to talk about, but a brief flavour of your work with women's rights, and then we can go on to CEDAW and the work that you do there. Thank you.
Well, Davina, thank you. And it's very nice to be here indeed. And I'm 88 years old, and I've been working on women's rights for many, many years. I'm a lawyer by training. I used to head law and policy at International Planned Parenthood, been an asylum and immigration lawyer looking at what happens to women refugees and asylum seekers. And for the last 30 years, since my husband died, I've been working particularly on the rights of widows. Widows in developing countries, and particularly widows in fragile conflict-afflicted countries where armed conflicts have made millions of women of all ages, child widows, young mothers, elderly grandmothers, widows into widowhood in countries where the very status of widows is problematic and where widows are often seen as almost subhuman, as chattels, and they have no rights to inheritance, to land ownership. They're the poorest of all poor women. But also in the last 5 years, I've added to working on widows. I'm working very, very much to try and get the CEDAW and the international community, the UN generally, to address the appalling situation facing millions of uncounted half-widows of the wives of the missing or the forcibly disappeared. We don't even know whether their husbands are in mass graves, are they in prison, have they disappeared somewhere. They have absolutely no rights at all, no closure, no grieving, they can't remarry, they have no pension. So I do that. But I also work on the human rights of women in conflict-afflicted countries, women who are refugees, women who are members of minority groups. So I work a lot on the Tamils and the Kurds and the poor, poor women in Kashmir, which is now, of course, under appalling oppression. And we're seeing everywhere the rise of authoritarian regimes. We're seeing under COVID-19 another huge increase in the numbers of widows of all ages, because as we know, more men die from COVID-19 than women. And in appalling lockdowns that are happening in so many countries, the widows are even poorer. They can't even get out to do the most exploitative forms of work or domestic service, begging or prostitution. So it's actually far worse for widows. So we work a lot with CEDAW, and I'll go back in a moment, but we've got a big project just coming to the end. We're presenting to CEDAW at the end of this year a dossier on discrimination against widows, asking governments to really address the way widows are deprived of all their rights, going all through the articles of the convention, and also how their rights under the 12 action areas of the Beijing Platform for Action are often quite ignored. So that's what we do, and we think the CEDAW is hugely important. It's the one forum where governments can be made accountable and they can be named and shamed. Unfortunately, I mean, there's no timeline, there are no sanctions. We can't take them to the International Criminal Court or the or a strategic European court at all, but at least they can be named and shamed. And it's the one place where NGOs and women's voices can really be heard. And I'm ashamed. Here I am, a UK citizen, a British lawyer, and I'm really ashamed about the indifference that this government is showing to the CEDAW right now. It shows indifference to women's rights at a time when we all are going to suffer so much, women particularly, as we leave the European Union. So the CEDAW is more important than ever.
Yeah. Thank you so much for that, Margaret. And obviously people around the world are grateful to you for everything that you're doing for them. But you've brought us round to exactly our government. And I was present when our government was examined in Geneva in front of the CEDAW committee and actually found failing and wanting in its response to what CEDAW had asked it to do in previous years. And our government does seem, as you have said, to be very dismissive of women's rights and of what CEDAW, the UN are asking them to do. Now, I know your history with this goes back a long way with CEDAW, but you also were part of the National Women's Commission. Now, that at least gave women a voice in the UK, but it's not here anymore.
Let me tell you that the Women's National Commission, which was founded in 1969, of which I was a member of, it was the marvel of the whole world. We would go to the CSW, the UN Commission on the Status of Women, every year, right up to 2010. And all the other countries all over the world, even the United States, they all admired the fact that we had a really good institutional mechanism for women. But the Tories, along with the Lib Dems in coalition in 2010, without any consultation, when they got rid of 91 quangos, they got rid of the Women's National Commission. And instead, we have no institutional mechanism for women in the way that it's defined in the CEDAW and in the Beijing Platform for Action, because it has to be supported by legislation. All that we have at the moment, and we're all part of it, is a thing that we set up in order to give some voice to the women all over the UK. So we set up the UK Civil Society Alliance. But that's not the same, because we don't anymore have what we had then, which is a direct line to government ministers, in which you could really hear women's voices, so we could really influence policy. Everything has to go through the Government Equality Office. And again, the CEDAW committee has said to the Government Equality Office, you are not the institutional mechanism, you are the government, and what you have to set up something else. Apart from the fact that they've also, I mean, we seem to completely ignore, you don't want me to go through all the recommendations that come from the CEDAW committee. We were told to ratify the Istanbul Convention. That's that convention to eliminate violence against women, because that's on, as you know now, violence against women is taking on all sorts of aspects and features that were actually unthought of in, when was it, 41 years ago. And we haven't done that. We were also told, they were told to look very, very carefully at the impact on women of us leaving the European Union. And we haven't done anything about that either. And I think I could go on, but we haven't got that much time. But I think that a demonstration of our indifference to the CEDAW is that in 41 years, the UK has never once nominated any person from this country to sit on that committee of 26 members. They give all sorts of ridiculous. They used to say, oh, there are no suitably qualified women. Or they'd say, oh, well, we're very busy working on trying to get our nomination to the International Criminal Court or the Human Rights. We've got no time for that. So this is appalling. They've also been told, and you know this, Davina, very well, that we should be domesticating the CEDAW. That is to say, we should legislate, you should bring the whole of the CEDAW into our domestic legislation. And this government said, oh, no, we don't need to do that. We've got our own Equality Act, our 2010 Equality Act. We've got our own Human Rights Act. We don't need to do that. That's much wider. So we don't take any notice at all. And well, I'm so glad that you're setting up this tribunal, because there's nowhere else that we can have a, boy, even if we go to the Commission on the Status of Women now, where women's NGOs are losing their voice, because everywhere the space for civil society is shrinking. Well, after all, we've got the UN is in Trump land. And in Trump land, when we go to the CSW, many of our amazing women from developing countries, not just Muslim countries, when we have actually denied visas. I mean, I don't know how the UN can operate under Trump, because it's very difficult very often for women even to get there. That makes CEDAW even more important. It makes CEDAW even more important because we're no longer in the EU, and women are losing a lot of the rights that the directives that the EU are giving them. So, you know, I'm absolutely determined that we fight on this, that we women, otherwise we are doing them a terrible disservice. It's the only way. And when you think about, they've told us off at CEDAW about the way austerity, the universal household benefit, you know how that impacted austerity on women. You know how everything to do with COVID-19 and lockdown, how everything is affecting women and girls so terribly, badly, disproportionately. So it's very, very, and now we have another thing. We now have the merger of DFID into the Foreign Office, FCDO. And again, we're worried because hardly anybody of that interim team in that new merger. They're all to do with commerce and trade and arms sales and war, and very few proportionately are the development people. And DFID was a real leader on women's rights all over the world. So you see, Davina, how important it is that we actually have your tribunal on CEDAW.
Thank you so much, Margaret. I couldn't have put it better myself. We've got to make sure that CEDAW is transposed into domestic law, and that we finally have a representative from the UK on that CEDAW committee. Thank you so much for your time.
I must say also that it's absolutely, we are completely bound by the CEDAW and by international law, because we also are a member of the Council of Europe. So that makes us bound anyway by the European Court of Human Rights and the CEDAW. So, you know, all this stuff about, oh, you know, we'll make all our own laws. We have international obligations. And if we breach them, if we violate them, then our reputation all over the world goes down and down into a horrible, nasty swamp of dissent, of shame.
Thank you so much, Margaret. Thank you.